Well, hi everybody, Father Alex here. Welcome to another episode of the Godcast. The Godcast this week is looking at the subject of living in love and faith. The Church of England podcast today around recent announcements by the Church to kind of halt the process for offering a prayer of blessing to a same-sex couple, and we're going to be looking at some of the consequences and the fallout of that with two esteemed guests. My guests are Professor Helen King and the Reverend Canon Neil Patterson, who will introduce themselves as we get into the podcast. But please, I do hope you enjoy this discussion. It might be a bit niche, but it's an important one to be had. And if you could share it, that'd be wonderful. And if you like the Godcast, then please do subscribe to the YouTube channel. But for now, enjoy this podcast with Professor Helen King and the Reverend Canon Neil Patterson. Well, I'm delighted to say that joining me on the Godcast this week is Professor Helen King and the Reverend Canon Neil Patterson, and we're here to talk matters of living in love and faith, prayers of love and faith, whatever you want to call it. We're going to cover that now. So welcome. It's good to get you on the Godcast. How are you both?
Doing well,
Very well,
thank you.
thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, Helen. Let's the Godcast is a bit niche because it attracts people who don't come to church, who might just be tuning in because they follow the Godcast. Could you perhaps give some perspective to this whole subject of living in love and faith? Maybe a little bit of context to where it came from, how it started, where it got to, and where it's led us to this point today.
Sure, Alex. Well, assuming that your listeners don't want to be here for the next 3 hours or something, short version is something like this. Church of England has been discussing sexuality and particularly what its attitude is to its LGBT members for decades. We're talking about 50 years. Keeps producing reports, nothing happens. There was a big debate in 2017 where Synod sort of rebelled against the House of Bishops and said, this latest document isn't good enough. We need something else. We need something that gives, quote, a radical new Christian inclusion. Then something called Living in Love and Faith was started, and it was a discussion process. I was in one of the groups talking about history and what history has to say to this. And we wrote papers. Eventually, they will put together some of them into a book, into videos, into resources, so that ordinary parishes across the country could talk about sexuality. Now, this is of course, quite tricky because you're not actually sort of talking about sex, you're talking about people's orientation. And within the Church of England, there are some people who think that it's okay to be gay so long as you don't ever have a sexual relationship. And there are other people who think that that's not a problem. Why shouldn't people who are gay be able to enter sexual relationships like everybody else? Particularly, why shouldn't they be able to enter the committed relationship of marriage? And that's where one of the big problems is. At the moment, although you've got civil marriage for same-sex couples, you can't be married in church. And it gets more complicated. That's the sort of easy bit. But the Church of England, in its bizarre wisdom, decided to say that gay couples in a same-sex civil partnership were okay, but still can't come to church and have a service there. But it's always been saying also that clergy can be in same-sex civil partnerships because there's no sex in civil partnerships, which is kind of a weird assumption. But clergy in same-sex marriages, if they get married, they can stay in their current job, but they cannot be licensed to a new job. So they basically end their time of working for the church, which seems in a time of reduced vocations to ministry quite a weird thing to do. Now, this all got slightly more confusing in 2023 when the bishops decided to allow these things called prayers of love and faith. Prayers of love and faith is a group of prayers and readings which a same-sex couple can have in church, but only if it's in an existing service. A service is going to happen anyway. So they can come to church and hear prayers, be blessed as people. Interesting question whether you're blessing the relationship or whether you're blessing the people, but you can't have that prayers of love and faith as a freestanding service, like a marriage service. And the argument there is because it would look like a marriage. But we've also had freestanding services for couples who are in a civil partnership, civil marriage, after one of them's divorced. Now, since 2002, divorced couples, where one's been divorced, can marry in church under certain circumstances. But some of them don't. But they might want to come to church and have a service said with them so that they can sort of commit their relationship to God. And that is okay. There is a service for that, and it's a freestanding service. So it's very, very confusing and messy. And what's happened now, new development, is the House of Bishops has come out with a statement basically saying, well, that's it, we can't do any more. We can't do the freestanding prayers of love and faith. You can have them in existing services, but that's your lot. And as for clergy and same-sex marriage, no. That also affects ordinands, people looking to think about whether they've got a vocation to serve in the Church of England. People in training for ministry cannot get married if they're in a same-sex relationship, because if they do, they're out. And this is not the sort of generous provision that we were looking for. So that's about where we are now. Neil's probably got something to add to that because he's the legal expert.
No, I think that's a fair summary, Helen. And yes, it remains a very complicated picture. Yeah. Just Alex, can you just cut the next 10 seconds?
So I think it's probably worth stating that all three of us have or were members of General Synod. Myself and Helen currently are, and Neil, you were for a considerable period of time, and you're now the Vice Dean at Bristol Cathedral. What was your initial thoughts about LLF? I was very open. I was like, I'm not going to engage with this. This is something that we're just kicking the can down the road. That was the proverbial term that was being used. Were you encouraged that discussion was taking place? And what was your reaction to the news that Helen has just kind of brought us to there, where the bishops have said, actually, do you know what? We can do no more.
So in terms of LLF as a whole, I have always been quite hopeful because I've always believed that having the dialogue helps. I first joined General Synod in 2012. And for a very long time, it seemed as if everyone was talking about sexuality, but it never actually reached debate. And that seemed to me an element of the stifling of it. And obviously, if you're gay as I am, in a sense, it was a kind of institutional closeting. We won't talk about you, we won't talk about the issue because it's too difficult. And rather like almost all gay people say, actually, when you come out, it's always better because there's nothing going to be right so long as you're living with the dishonesty and the hiding. And I always thought to get the debate onto the floor of Synod where people could actually talk about it would be good. And I think it has, in spite of all the pain and a lot of very harsh things that have been said, I think it's been good to get it there. And I don't think it will ever go away. And that I think is good in itself because people are more open about themselves and their relationships and their faith in that context. So I think that is, in a strange way, progress. In terms of what's happened recently, I think I'm not as surprised as some people. What bedevils this process is the layers of knowledge and engagement. Just in the hope of amusing some listeners, we did have a moment in one of the conversations about this, the kind of small groups that have been convened across the divisions, where somebody from a different perspective to us said the problem with this is always about inner rings. There are too many inner rings in the Church of England. And in this process, there's the bishops and their conversations. There's the people who are brought into particular groups. There are the staff team who are trying to plan the process in the face of these difficulties. And everyone always thinks that somebody else has more inside knowledge, and that creates a lot of suspicion. But I can't deny having had more of a close insight as to where things were than perhaps some people. And so I was aware that the bishops, although they could have taken some small positive steps forward, they were already quite constrained in what they could do. So I wasn't as surprised as some, perhaps, as to what came out.
Okay, so
do you want to say or carry on? Yeah.
Well, I was going to say, if you're not surprised, were you disappointed?
Oh yes, and I think what's disappointing is that the bishops have been given a lot of strong lobbying from the Conservative side. The other thing, though, which I think is slightly hopeful, is that, as I understand it, the really decisive thing they decided was that they were not willing to support various proposals for delegation of ministry. And this is something that many people on the Conservative side were pushing for very, very strongly sometimes it's ignored for its own sake. The idea that if your bishop is of progressive views, supports same-sex relationships, or has even ever said or blogged or voted anything other than a conservative orthodox line, then you have the right to ask for another bishop to minister to you, to visit your parish, to conduct your ordinations, if you're clergy, to conduct your personal reviews, to support your ordinance. And to me, that's not how the Church of England works. We are one church with one structure, and we've always had a great variety of views and practices, liturgically, socially, in all sorts of ways. And the bishops very firmly said, no, we're not going there. We're not going to a situation where you can say to us, I'm sorry, I don't like you, bishop. Give me another bishop I do like. Because that's not what episcopacy is. Having a bishop is recognizing there's one person who brings us together across diocese and one body of bishops who bring us together as a church. And we don't pick and mix them according to taste. And that perspective has come entirely from the conservative side. Some people say, oh, but you can have the opposite. If your bishop is conservative, then you could have a progressive bishop minister to you. But those of us who are more progressive don't want that. We're happy to be ministered by any bishops. Some bishops don't want to minister to us, but that's still a problem on the conservative side. We're happy to be one church in which everyone mixes in our diversity of views.
Yeah, Helen, what was your response? What was your? Were you as surprised, or sorry, were you as disappointed as Neil, and perhaps less surprised?
Yeah, I was disappointed, obviously, but I wasn't that surprised either, because we've seen the sort of confusion levels in terms of what we need to do the various things. This has been going on for ages. So when the prayers of love and faith were commended by the bishops to be used in existing services, it was done under a particular bit of canon law. You know, this is the Church of England, right? So there's canon law, and it's all very complicated, and that is just how we are. You can't say, oh, let's just abandon that. So it was done under a simple thing, a B5, where you simply say the bishops commend these resources because there's nothing else like them around. You can use them. The end. But for the standalone services, the separate services, it's been decided they can't do that. They have to go through a much more complicated process, which will involve 2/3 majorities in each of the three houses of bishops, clergy, and laity. So it's very hard to get anything over the line for that. And when the ordination of women was eventually voted on, it got through by 1 or 2 votes on that basis. It's really tight. So to get to the point where you say, Will, you can use them in an existing service, but you can't use exactly the same prayers in a separate service, is quite weird. It's been pointed out that something like a baptism, you can have a baptism during an existing service, but you can also have a baptism, 3 o'clock in the afternoon with just your family and friends. Still the same baptism, still works, but you can't do that with the prayers of love and faith. That's what's been decided. That was a surprise. I thought there was a possibility that the bishops could just say, okay, we'll approve these as well, same sort of thing. But the processes are complex for the Church of England for anything. That's one of the big problems here. You can't just do what you want.
Yeah, I think that's something worth picking up now. That is the actual process of General Synod, and as you're talking, I'm kind of thinking people who might be listening to this who aren't connected to the Church of England, thinking, what the hell is going on here? And I think about I personally think about the semantics of this. I mean, in all intents and purposes, this is a prayer, isn't it? It's a prayer, and I can't think of anything else where I need somebody's permission to pray for somebody. And I still don't really think I need General Synod's permission to pray for a gay couple to live in love and faith, for want of a better word. So let's just unpack that a little bit. Let's start with you, Helen, and then Neil. What is going on? I mean, it is ridiculous. I mean, when I think about the tears and the sweat and the pain and suffering that I've experienced personally as a heterosexual man over the last 5 years on Synod, it has been damaging to so many people. What's going on, Helen?
Well, even the fact that when we have any discussion of living in love and faith on Synod now, we have to have extra bonus chaplains because so many people are upset. And we have extra bonus chaplains for those on the progressive end of things and for conservatives because everyone's getting upset. This is really not a great way of living, is it? And even before this latest announcement, the conservative groups in Synod were not attending, for example, a communion service led by someone that they didn't approve of because they'd said that the prayers of love and faith were okay. So it's already a fractured table. And the whole point about the Eucharist for me is that you come together around the table. Jesus welcomes everybody. It's one of the Eucharistic prayers that we sometimes use, says, it's a ragtag collection of people brought together around the table. And we all share the one bread and the one wine. But some people don't. So there's already this separation going on. And that really goes back to a long history of the conservative evangelicals in particular wanting to separate from the rest of us. Now, there was a big discussion some decades ago about whether the Church of England was the right place for conservative evangelicals to be. And it was agreed it was the best boat to fish from. So the Church of England offers you things like vicarages, very good, pension plans, excellent, access to schools, all those things. There are lots of things which being a Church of England vicar give you that being in an independent church would not necessarily. So there are reasons for staying in the Church of England. But those people who want to separate, who see the Church of England as somehow impure, some of them also don't agree with the ordination of women, and therefore feel that we're already somehow corrupt because we ordain women. We've got a woman coming as Archbishop of Canterbury. Well, that's a woman in authority, and there are people who say that their reading of the Bible doesn't allow that. So we've already got quite a big tension there with a group that seems to want to separate. And just like with the ordination of women, there are those who are arguing for what they call a third province. So the Church of England at the moment has two provinces, York and Canterbury. Each has their own archbishop, and the two archbishops come together to be the Church of England sort of authority figures. But there's people who want a third province. Well, now whether that would be all the progressives somehow get shunted into a third province, or whether it would be the Conservatives have their own province, this is huge. This is a complete change to the structure of the Church of England that some people want. But of course, they also want to keep access to the money. Church is pretty rich. Individual churches don't feel like that, but the church commissioners have, I think it's 11 billion in their investments. There's real money, and some of that gets spent on projects in churches, which you can bid to get. And some churches are very organized and have a sort of official people who write the bids and know what they're doing and get the money. There are lots of questions about money underneath this. A lot of it is follow the money.
And Neil?
Follow the money, but also part of what we're in, and part of the frustration of it is we've had a lot of kind of proxy ethical debates. The underlying question, really, which was explored really quite well in the Living in Love and Faith book and resources, which Helen, amongst other people, contributed to, was what does the church think about same-sex relationships? Are they essentially, are they a good thing or not? And I think I felt increasingly that we then took that to synod the wrong way. The bishops chose to take it to synod the wrong way. I think they had a choice, essentially. They could have brought a kind of theological debate principle, which was said, okay, what do we believe about same-sex relationships in the Church of England? Which would have been, okay, we'll settle the principle and then we'll talk about what that means we change in practice. Instead, what they did was effectively say, well, we know we don't agree about that, so let's try some moderate changes in practice that are a bit of a fudge and a compromise in the hope that they'll find support. Now, the Church of England has a very long history of compromises of different sorts, famously going right back to the Reformation era. The formula at the giving of communion is a combination of a more Protestant version and a more Catholic version from the reign of Edward VI that were combined in the reign of Elizabeth I and have been in the prayer book ever since. And that archetype has been followed in many ways. But I think that underestimated the seriousness and the conviction of those who, although they don't say it explicitly that often, simply believe that same-sex relationships are always bad and should be, prohibited and discouraged and preached against in the church. And in all credit to those people, many of whom I've spent a lot of time with and know very well, they have behaved in a completely rational, organized and coherent way. It's not difficult to predict the way they'll react to things because they do exactly what the logical thing is to achieve the objective of maintaining their position as strongly as they can. And that's what they believe. I can't fault them for it in a sense. but I think the bishops and other people towards the centre have tended to believe that, oh, it's all right, everyone in the end will acknowledge there needs to be a kind of compromise. And that, I think, is not going to happen. And so I'm increasingly thinking we need to work out ways to get back to the debate of principle, to get people actually to talk about relationships themselves, talk about their relationship to marriage. The language I think is quite attractive is the goods of marriage, i.e. companionship, support of family life, both in faith and all those things. Can they be found outside heterosexual marriage as the canons of the law and the past have described it? We would definitely say yes, they can. They can be found in same-sex relationships. They can be found in other relationships as well. But let's perhaps skirt over the fact that gay people are being used as the proxy for what the Church of England believes about any other relationships. There are lots of people cohabiting in straight relationships, never discussed by the Church as an issue one way or the other.
Neil, so we very much so far have talked about the process of LLF. What about the personal? You are a man that has invested a lot of time into this area, and I sometimes wonder what it's like for a gay person to dwell in this arena constantly, where it appears to me that some people may just say this is theology, and the conservatives say we're doing theology properly. We are upholding the Bible's teaching on same-sex relationships, and therefore, for us to say what you're doing wrong, what you're doing as a gay man, Neil, is wrong, is our biblical truth. It's our moral compass that's telling us to do this. What would you say to people who aren't part of the church? From outside, it just looks like we're a bunch of homophobes.
Of course it does. And partly because it's very easy to say. I'm reminded, actually, I can do this here, Helen talking many years ago on General Synod about somebody who stood there and said, I uphold the Bible, and waved one around. The problem is you can't just uphold it, you have to open it and read it and discover the wonderful diversity of voices from across the centuries of God's people that are in it. And that means that actually it's no simple matter to say the Bible says this about sexuality or many other things, of course. Personally, as me, I think I'm unusual. I'm very aware that a lot of LGBTQ people are feeling very bruised at the moment. There have been some powerful statements of that. A recent sermon by the Dean of Southwark, a blog by the Dean of Canterbury have expressed that very clearly. I think, for whatever reason, I don't feel so disheartened. I have a lot of cheerfulness for carrying on what is clearly going to be a long campaign and debate into the future. I do have a very cheerful partner, David, and who's in orders himself and ministering in the edge of the Church in Wales. And I think I'm fortunate in Bristol Cathedral in being a very supportive place. So personally, I'm fine. And interestingly, I've had to respond to people getting in touch, including some really thoughtless conservative people saying, "Oh, you must be so upset. We're so sorry for you." It's some of the people who've caused the outcome we've got now, which is slightly unbelievable. But actually, for whatever reason, I find myself not feeling too disheartened. And I've also heartened by the strength of the reaction. I think the reaction there's been to the House of Bishops statement is a reminder to me and many of us that there are lots of people who care about this and want to act and now have motivation to do so, and that's good.
Mm-hmm. Helen, what would you like to add anything to that, and where does that leave us? I mean, I haven't seen a bishop other than the Bishop of Manchester write something about this, and maybe I've missed it, but the bishop seems to be kind of hiding under a wall of silence and kind of just hoping it might disappear or move on to the next thing. Where do you see where we are at this point in time?
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it, the lack of response from individual bishops. I know that Bishop Cooley, the Bishop of Chelmsford, has called for a meeting in January to listen to what people in her diocese want to talk to her about here. That's very good. A bit of listening is always useful, but January is a long way off. And I'm very surprised that we haven't had more from the inclusive bishops, because we know there are bishops who are inclusive. The way that this announcement about the end of LLF was put forward was very much a majority view of the House of Bishops, all parts of the House of Bishops coming together, united in this view. Well, we'd like to know why. Why did this suddenly look like a really good idea to stop everything now? And there's been very little sense of repentance for the way that LGBT people have been and are still treated in the church. I think, as Neil says, he's an exception. He's happily partnered, he's in a supportive environment. This is not the case for many lesbian and gay people in the church. And those who are feeling threatened in their churches, remember, we still have conversion therapy out there. We still have churches who believe it's possible to pray with someone and change their orientation completely. And maybe for some people whose orientation is a bit sort of wishy-washy, that will make their mind up one way or the other. Some people remain bi. Other people do not change and feel it's their fault for not changing. And it worries me that people in that sort of church are not safe, basically. Let's put it in simple words, they're not safe. And I think it's very odd how we've gone on for so long, and yet we've got to this point now of just no more. So yes, there are signs with particular sermons that have been preached, that have been shared online and so on. But for most people in the Church of England who don't take part in, discussions on Thinking Anglican's site or follow blogs and so on, they must be wondering what on earth's going on here. Mm. And I don't know what we can do to make them feel safer.
Yeah.
To make sure they are safe.
I've just glanced at my clock, and gosh, this time's flown by. But I do want to just a couple of things I want to pursue. Helen, what should the response be now then? Because it does, I would guess that the conservative side of the church feel they've got the progressives right against the ropes here, and it's kind of, check, if not checkmate. What do you feel the response should be?
It's really boring to keep saying this, but write to your bishop, see your bishop, and maybe arrange a delegation to go and visit your bishop. Let them know what your story is. Because one of the things that's come out very strongly in the blogs and sermons so far is people, gay clergy, standing up and telling their stories. And it's quite possible that some conservatives have never heard these stories, have never realized what's been done to people. It's also possible they don't want to hear these stories. But I think tell your story and be ready to decide what's going to happen. I don't like the idea that we withdraw our money from the Church of England in liberal congregations. First of all, most congregations are quite mixed. You have people with different views and we all get on with each other and it's fine. But we have, at the moment, conservative evangelicals saying, don't pay your money to the diocese, to the Church of England central structures, unless it can be guaranteed it's going to churches that think just like us. I find that very dangerous, and I don't like the idea of Church of England churches doing it. So I wouldn't encourage liberals to do that. But it may come. The other thing is using the prayers of love and faith in existing services, continue doing it, because there are those who would like to stop even that. And if, in terms of using them in standalone services, maybe do it. Mm-hmm. Maybe do it, see what happens. Because churches have been doing it. It was never really quite clear that there was going to be a possible block put on it. It was more, we were encouraged not to do it quite yet, because there would need to be a process of registration to check which churches were doing it. So they could come back and say, how many of you had, how did it go, that sort of thing. So people just went ahead anyway.
Yeah.
So maybe continue.
Yeah.
It doesn't strike me as the worst thing on earth, compared with some of the things conservative evangelicals have done, like having their own ordinations with a visiting bishop, which seems to me a lot dodgier, frankly.
Mm-hmm. And Neil, would you like to hear more from inclusive bishops? Do you wonder why they're silent?
I do. I wonder if some of them have gone a bit quiet because one or two of the initial letters, like the Bishop of Manchester's, and I think the one or two others that were very similar, were greeted with a fairly sharp response because they were a little bit sensitive. So I think that's a part of it. I was heartened to see the Bishop of Edinburgh and Ipswich, Joanna Grenfell, in the Church Times last week, making quite positive thoughts about how can we move forward here in a more positive way. I think the other thing to say to anybody listening is, yes, write to your bishops, but also organise in all other respects. I mean, blowing our own trumpet. Helen and I are the leads of Together for the Church of England, which is a charity campaigning. We have branches in each diocese. We are fundraising for the next General Synod elections. get involved. It's really helpful, and also be more involved if you can. If you're in church life, think about the structures you're part of. Influence happens at every level. Deanery synod isn't the most thrilling place in the world, but it has a voice. Diocesan structures are mostly crying out for volunteers and people willing to serve on committees. And then you discover you do get in those places where decisions are made that then may change the character of your part of the diocese or doing your own church. And it's worth being in the room.
Yeah. And Helen, the final word with you. People who might be interested in getting involved. Neil's mentioned Together. Just tell people where they can find that. And there's Inclusive Church, of course, and there's lots of groups out there, aren't there?
Yep, there are lots of groups out there. That's part of the problem. There are lots of groups, but we are quite coordinated now, I think, compared with where we were 10 years ago, say. So Together for the Church of England has a website. It has a link on that called Campaigns, where you can see what we're doing. One of those links is to an open letter, which the group Inclusive Church, which is not just Anglican churches, but other churches, other denominations in this country, but for the Church of England members, they've got an open letter which you can sign. So please do that. When I last heard about that, there was over 3,000 signatures. It's just a question of feeling that you're involved. The thing with Together groups is that because, as Neil says, there's a diocesan contact for each one, you can simply email that person and say, I want to hear more. And we'll put you in touch. We have Zoom meetings, we have face-to-face meetings, we share information. It's just nice, very good. I know people in the Oxford Together group, for example, who are in churches where they feel like they're the only person who thinks like they do. And this makes them realize that it's a legitimate point of view and connects them with like-minded people. So, find your friends.
What
if
about,
you haven't got any, make them.
Yeah, I quickly just thought of something else I just want to ask. What about apathy, Helen? I was speaking to a few people recently who've just said, well, we're just waiting for the church to make a decision. Meanwhile, back in the parish, we just get on with life. And I've had very little correspondence about this from people within the diocese. I do worry about apathy. Would you say a word on that?
Yeah, I think people don't actually believe that we've made so little progress. I think when the prayers of love and faith were commended for use in existing services, the news headlines were all sort of, oh, Church of England finally welcomes lesbian and gay people. And everyone thought, oh, good, that's the end of that then. But it wasn't. None of it's the end of that then. People in my parish say, what are you talking about at the next synod? And you say, living in love and faith. And they go, I thought we'd done that. It's that sense that nothing is changing. The risk of apathy, of course, is whether people just decide that synods are a waste of time and don't bother to stand for synod next time. Well, I can say I'm going to stand for synod next time, although it's been 5 years of hell in many ways. It's also 5 years of getting to know some really great people and working with them. It's been a privilege to serve, really, as an elected lay member for Oxford Diocese. So I will stand again and find people who would like to do that. It's it's not everyone's cup of tea. You know what it's like, Alex. We've had the odd cup of tea and discussed what it's like, but it actually can make a difference. It's just a question of persevering. I'm stuck between persisting and persevering there. But both of them, persist and persevere.
Well, I would just encourage people to reach out to Neil and Helen. You two people I have the highest regard for. You are diligent. You are resilient. You're so committed to it, and I think people like you are power to the cause. And I would encourage people to reach out to you if they want to get involved more. But for now, thank you both for coming on the Godcast. It's been wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. Great to be with you.